Good morning, everybody. I'm Zach Blanchard, and this is Political Brew. Happy 4th of July weekend. I'm joined now by Republican analyst Phil Harriman and Democrat Ethan Strimling. Good morning to you both.
Good morning, Zach.
Good to see you.
We want to start with what is likely going to be a big win for the Mills administration as the legislative session continues to drag on. It's being called the most progressive abortion legislation in the country. And this week, it is all but certain to get to the governor's desk after a final vote in the Senate. The bill would allow abortions even after fetal viability if a doctor deems it medically necessary, something Republican lawmakers say goes too far.
LD 1619 is the most extreme bill we've seen this session, maybe this decade.
I support the bill as it is because it provides discretion for providers and patients to make these private decisions together.
And Phil, I want to start with you. This was a really close vote in the House. Do you agree that this legislation is extreme?
I do, but the rest of the story, Zach, is what does the department who's going to write the regulations that back up this bill, what does necessary mean? And that's going to be, I think, the key to how people react to this going forward.
Ethan?
Yeah, not extreme at all. This is about women's access to health care, women's access to abortion services that are needed. I really commend the Mills administration for stepping forward in this way, for recognizing that women in Maine need these protections, and we need to make sure that we expand access to health care even further beyond this in other ways. But a tremendous step forward for the Mills administration.
But if this goes forward, you're probably talking some legal challenges, right?
I would suspect, and again, once the regulations come out, the people who are opposed to this are going to find a way to go to court and make sure it's clarified.
Well, but the courts have made very clear that the states now have the right to set this up, right? Now, we didn't want that. We believed that Roe v. Wade should have been left in place and allow states to go further, but the Supreme Court has made very clear states can do what it is that they feel is best for the women of their state, and that's what's happened.
All right. Democrats still have another big item to get through: paid family and medical leave. Governor Mills published this op-ed in the Portland Press Herald this week saying she will sign it into law. Writing this bill, tailored to Maine, represents a historic victory for working people and families across our state. Ethan, I'm assuming you agree with this, but businesses are not happy even with some of the changes that have been made.
Yeah, I am very happy, and again, this is really important for workers across the state, for families across the state, and good for Governor Mills. She was a little reluctant for a while. She did do a bit of the bidding of the business community to make some changes in it, to build a better balance in that sense, but in the end, the final product is going to be good for workers. Look, I mean, we're one of the few countries in the world, one of the few industrialized countries in the world that doesn't provide paid family medical leave for their workers. It's great that Maine is leading the way in this way, so I'm very excited.
Phil, it's not every day you see a governor write something like this in the paper. Why lay it out like that?
Well, I think for two reasons. First of all, there are many employers in Maine who do provide these benefits. They didn't need this law to be passed to offer them, but I understand why the legislation was put forward. And I think the governor, to your point, Zach, had to react to this hammer over the head of the legislature there was a referendum that was ready to be introduced that was probably much further and more expansive than the one that was passed. The question becomes, are they still going to put forward that referendum? We could still have this on the ballot.
I don't think they're going to. They've made pretty clear that if the legislature passes something substantial, you're right, it was a hammer, good for them, because the legislature, we've been talking about this, talked about it back when I was in the Senate 20 years ago. This is an issue that keeps coming up. Finally, we're getting it across the finish line, and that is because they went and got the signatures and said, we're going to the ballot one way or the other.
As for what the governor isn't supporting, a big bill related to tribal rights. On Friday, she said that she plans to veto that legislation. But while saying that the Wabanaki Nations deserve to have rights, she says this just isn't the right way to go. So I want to do something a little different. We're going to talk about what's been struck down and what's made it through. I need you to tell me if it was the right move or the wrong move. Phil, let's start with that veto on tribal rights. Right move or wrong?
The right move.
Ethan?
Wrong move. We knew it was coming. I think the big issue now is, will they override the veto? It could be her first veto override.
Well, the governor was very clear from the beginning that there were constitutional problems. This was a federal law that was passed that created the land claims settlement. This is going to get more complicated.
All right. And most of the gun legislation put forth failed to even make it to the governor's desk. The Senate voted down a background checks bill as well. Ethan, right move or wrong move?
Wrong move. You know, just the amount of gun violence that we've seen, a couple of these terrible random shootings just in the Westbrook parking lot a couple of weeks ago, and a few months before that, the killing of the 4 people, getting all those weapons out of that person's house. Clearly, Maine is seeing gun violence. We have got to do something. Legislature failed us on this one.
Bill?
I think it's the right move. In order for these bills not to get to the governor's desk, it takes a bipartisan group in both the House and the Senate. I agree with Ethan, we need to do something, but it's about the behavior, it's not about the regulations.
Something that became law, gender-affirming care. Phil, right move or wrong move?
Right move. I think that is the way the state should treat anybody who's in medical necessity. The key is going to be what is the parental involvement in gender-affirming care for minors.
Ethan?
Yeah, definitely the right move. This was already basically in the rules. This is codifying it to make sure it can't be taken away. So great job.
And finally, this week, the governor was forced to respond to this. Asylum seekers staying at the Portland Expo protesting in the streets over conditions there and calling on the city and state to do more to make sure they have somewhere to stay. Here's what the governor had to say.
We're working with the city of Portland. I understand the challenges that the city has, not only with that population, but with other people who are unhoused. But we've been working with the city of Portland, and we've been using federal money and state money to provide appropriate supports for shelters of all sorts for all sorts of people.
Phil, there are a lot of moving parts here, but I think what's really being called out here is a lack of a formal plan.
Yeah, and I think, you know, for the protesters to basically say our generosity is not enough is, I think, very disappointing to at least people like me who say my tax dollars are going to create this environment that you're in, which presumably is much better than where they came from. But as the city of Portland has clearly said, we can't take any more. And this is an example of the fact that there's no other resources to accept more asylees.
Ethan, I know a lot of people feel that way.
Yeah, it would be very disappointing. I'm disappointing to hear it said today. I mean, who are we to say that, oh, it's okay if you have unsanitary conditions that you live in just because of it might somehow or another impact our tax dollars, which it doesn't. These are human beings. These are people who have traveled around the world to try to escape political repression, to try to escape poverty, to save their families from death. And our answer is, oh, you should eat stale bread and be in unsanitary conditions. Of course, that's not the right answer. The right answer is, what can we do to try to make Maine the place that we want you to be? Because if we didn't have immigration to Maine, we would be losing population. Immigrants are the reason that our state is growing. They are the future of our state. They have been since the turn of the century, whether it was the Irish or whether it was the Jews or whether it was Cambodians or whether it was Sudanese. Generation after generation of immigrants have built our state. And so how could we ever say, oh, don't worry about it, you get to live in a slum, we're going to be okay with that? How dare you complain?
Then what is the answer?
Well, the resources. I think, you know what, the reason they're in the Portland Exposition building, which is owned by the city of Portland, that has a shelter and showers, and maybe the food isn't what they want it to be, but we're doing the best we can with the resources we have.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. The Weekend Morning Report is back right after this. Joined once again by Republican analyst Phil Harriman and Democrat Ethan Strimling. Thanks for staying with us.
Yeah,
You're welcome.
good to see you.
Good morning.
I want to start with some major news out of the Supreme Court late this week as it wraps up its term. Justices ruling on a number of key cases, from LGBTQ+ rights to student loans. Friday, they struck down President Biden's student loan relief plan. The White House saying it expected this and is now prepared to continue to fight. Phil, I know you don't support Biden's plan, but politically, did it need to get to this point?
Yeah, it did. I think the president used it as a political opportunity during the election. If you vote for me, I'm going to resolve your student loan debt. I don't think this was a very difficult decision for the Supreme Court to make.
Ethan?
Very disappointing again. I mean, this means that, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of debt is going back on the backs of students who can't afford it. We have got to find a way to try to help our working class students in this country get through these tough times. And it's unfortunate the Supreme Court is stepping in and overriding what our elected leaders were elected to do.
And it wasn't just student loans. The court struck down affirmative action. The 6-3 ruling declared it's unconstitutional to consider race as a determining factor in college admissions. In her dissent, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson listed the legal and institutional roadblocks generations of people of color in America have had to overcome, from slavery to redlining and Jim Crow. Ethan, do you agree?
Well, I don't agree with their decision. I agree with her opinion on this for sure. Just a 1-2 punch to our educational system with the student loans and then this. I mean, this basically means, as we've seen, is there are going to be fewer Black and Latino students in our institutions of higher learning, and there's going to be less relief in terms of student loans. So just a terrible blow for our educational systems to try to make sure they're diverse and socioeconomically and based on race.
And Phil, already a number of colleges and universities in Maine have spoken out against this ruling.
Yeah, well, I support the ruling. I think the fact that we're going to be a colorblind society, we need to do it in acts and in deeds. And I disagree with Ethan. I think people who have the skill set to get into, you name the university, it shouldn't be an edge given because of someone's ethnicity or skin color.
Well, but they already have, that's a mistake about this, right? Every student who gets in is already qualified, right? If Harvard University picks its pool, they base that on everybody who's qualified, and then based on that, they then make a decision about how is it that we're going to put this class together. So it's unfortunate that we always seem to think that affirmative action means people who aren't qualified get in. That isn't the case, and the Supreme Court missed that beat, unfortunately.
All right, former President Donald Trump continues to dig himself deeper in this case of classified documents. Now we're hearing a new recording obtained by CNN in which he appears to brag about having the documents, knowing they contain sensitive information, including about a possible attack on Iran. Take a listen.
It is like highly confidential, secret. This is secret information.
Now, Phil, unsurprisingly, Trump is sticking to the same approach. Without evidence, he's accusing the special counsel of illegally leaking and spinning these recordings. Do you think that plays?
Not in the court of law. It's probably in the court of public opinion for sure. And I think that's the crux of why he's going to go to court, and this is going to be determined whether he had the right to have those documents and who else had the opportunity to see them who shouldn't have.
Ethan, is this the nail in the coffin, so to speak?
I've stopped saying there's a nail in the coffin for Donald Trump a while ago. It seems like every time a new recording comes out, I think he's done, and somehow or another he finds his way through. But, it's incredible that his poll numbers continue to be strong and rise. I mean, this guy's got 2 indictments, 50 charges against him at this point. I just am not sure what the GOP across this country is thinking, keeping this guy as their standard bearer.
All right, meantime, his rival Florida Governor Ron DeSantis hit the campaign trail hard this week. Both he and Trump made stops in New Hampshire. But if you look at the polls, he is trailing well behind Trump and dwindling. Phil, it's still early, but would you call that Trump will be the Republican nominee?
I hope not, frankly, but this is not uncommon to have the poll numbers ebb and flow so far away from the nomination process. I think DeSantis and Tim Scott and others that need to continue to campaign forward. It's a long ways to go. The court cases may determine people's opinion of Trump as the summer unfolds.
But what would it take? I mean, that margin is a big one.
Well, there's going to have to be a fundamental shift in the base of his support, who, as I've said on several occasions on the Political Brew, you might be able to get the nomination, but you're not going to appeal. Trump is not going to appeal to that independent, rural female voter to get the election.
Ethan?
Far be it from me to figure out what the GOP needs to do in order to figure out how to not have Trump. But I do think that DeSantis, Pence, some of these other candidates, they've got to find a way to appeal somehow or other to his base. But they have got to be willing to go after him a little bit. Campaigns are won both by saying who you are, but you do also have to contrast.
I think they've tried, though, and it's just not sticking.
But they're not doing it very strongly, right? They take little jabs and then they back up and say, oh, Trump shouldn't have been indicted for having the classified documents. Oh, but we don't like this little piece. You have to look at the package and say Trump should not be the nominee. And they have to be serious about it and consolidate. Then maybe they'd have a chance. But I think Phil's right. He's going to be the nominee as far as anything we can see.
All right, let's wrap things up. Winners, losers. Ethan, start with you.
Winners this week, I would say the women of Maine, big winners this week with the passage of paid family medical leave and the expanded abortion access bill. I'd say losers this week based on the Supreme Court, the LGBTQ plus community, Black and Latino students, and the student loan bill going down. Just on those 3 losers of the week are those constituencies.
I have a little bit of a dichotomy for winners and losers. Losers this week, to me, are the immigrants who are protesting our generosity. I think that was off base. The winner of the week is the protesters who protested the King of England and created the United States of America that we so much appreciate what they've given to us.
That is quite the dichotomy.
That is the
All right,
dichotomy.
Bill, Ethan, thanks so much for being with us. And that's going to do it for this week's Political Brew. Your morning report is back right after this.